It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the Phil Ferguson Show number 340. It's May of 2020, and I hope you are doing fantastic. I am getting sick and tired of the stay-at-home stuff, but the funny thing is, I don't think we can do it, folks. I don't think Americans, maybe you and your country are having better luck. I know New Zealand has done fantastic. Greece apparently has mastered this and done it very well. Some other countries have done really well at providing income and motivation and just a greater sense of community in those countries, allow people to sacrifice more of their time and freedom for the benefit of others. Americans, not so much. I think it's going to be a long, rough, hot summer, and we're going to have some states that open up, some that are going to open up too early, some that are going to have new jumps. I don't want to make it too dramatic, but dramatic increases in cases of people getting sick and spreading the coronavirus and going to the hospital, and probably, unfortunately, more deaths. But what is the fine line? I guess, we can't have everybody not work, or we can't have 10 or 20% of the population not work and not be subsidized by the government, because our government sucks pretty hard. And while they've pumped a lot of money into the economy, a big part of it has gone to companies, which is great as far as an economic stimulus, but doesn't help the person who's unemployed. So hopefully you have gotten your check, or you found some way to find out that you're about to get your check, which also unfortunately looks like it's a one-time thing, and that helps you get through until things get better. I'm pretty sure they'll get better. The question is when. And of course, it doesn't have to get better for the average person for the stock market to go up or down. Those things aren't always tied to each other. Just like I said a couple years ago when Trump got elected, people losing their liberties and civil rights doesn't mean that the market goes down. They're not tied. Maybe in a fair and just world they would be, but we don't live in a fair and just world, and the focus here is going to be on what markets do or don't do. So some thoughts on that. The market did drop, and depending on what you're looking at, was as much as 30% year to date. If you took the peak, from February, as much as 35%. Depends on how you want to make the numbers look. Of course, if you look over a year or two time period where even at the bottom, it was back to what it was 2 years ago. So if you're a long-term investor and you've been investing for 10 or 20 years, it's an annoying thing for your portfolio to go down. But compared to where you were 10 or 20 years ago, you've made a lot of money by being in stocks. But the short-term drops that happen from time to time are very discouraging, can be panic-inducing, but let's keep them in perspective. If you are close to retirement, hopefully you had a cushion and you had built up that cushion. And we now have this situation where, and it's one of those things when the market falls 20 or 30%, like it did, I will get the occasional phone call from a client that says, I want less exposure to stocks. And it's like, well, that's great, yo. The time to complain about having too many stocks was at the end of 2019 when the market made 31%. But no one called me and said, I think I now have too much stocks. I've made too much money in stocks. I want to get out. Humans just don't work that way, but it's the way you need to think, quite honestly. And people who are building their cushion or in retirement, many of the people who are my clients, we had those conversations where I recommended, and often we did sell some of their stocks. Not huge amounts, but 3 or 5 or 10% reduction of stocks after a 31% run in 12 months when you're a few years from retirement or in retirement. I think of that as a great way to lock in some of the profits that you made. But not everybody wanted to do that, and some people aren't close to retirement. And again, if you're 20 years from retirement, this is all kind of minutia that may not matter. But I did have a couple of clients that are in retirement that wanted to now dramatically reduce the volatility in their portfolio. Well, I really don't like the idea of doing that after the market fell 30-something%. But I had a couple of people that insisted, and for a couple of them, their portfolio was big enough that it doesn't really matter if they're mostly in stocks or mostly in bonds. They're still going to have enough to live on, and they're going to outlive their money. So it kind of becomes a moot point of having stocks. But most people aren't in that situation. However, we now have a situation where some parts of the U.S. stock market have come back. This is recorded as of May 1st. So if you listen to this on the 3rd or the 5th of May or a month later, it can be totally different reality. Right now, the Large Cap Growth Fund, the Vanguard Large Cap Growth Fund, which you will hear me talk about in the segment, VIGAX, is down minus negative whatever 0.7% year to date. And this is on top of making 37% in 2019, losing 3% in 2018, and making 28% in 2017. Again, you've made a lot of money. If you were kind of flipping your shit when the market went down 20-30% last month, this is now almost equal to what it was on January 1st of 2020. This would be a nice place, since you've made a ton of money in the last couple of years. If you've been in the market for the last couple of years, this might be a nice place to pull off some money now while it's up. Because if that drop scared you more than you thought it was going to, this is your escape hatch. Yeah, it's technically down from January 1st, and by the time you hear this, it might be down 7%, it might be up 5% because the markets are making big swings, but that's a place to look. If you have a stock fund that happens to be like this, that has a lot of large cap growth stocks, you can pull it up on Morningstar.com. If you have a stock fund that has done phenomenally well over the last 3 or 4 years, it probably has stocks like these large cap growth stocks, and that would be a place to look to take some of your profits and add to your cushion. Again, if you're 20 years out, this doesn't apply to you. But if you're in retirement or close to retirement and the big drop last month or two really upset you, you may have too high a percentage of your portfolio in stocks, and this would be a good place to look to balance out, because it's done really well. It's done really well this year so far compared to everybody else. If you are more of a risk taker, this might be a place to take out from a fund that's done well and put it into a fund that's not done well. And I'm specifically looking at the small cap value, which of course is the opposite of large cap growth. It year to date, as of today, is down 26.5%. So minus 0.7 or minus almost 27. You can take something that's done well and put it in something that's done pretty freaking terrible year to date in 2020. And it's kind of an arbitrage thing, again, because I think all 6 of the segments that I use for the U.S. stock market in the long run do about the same. If you can take money from something that's down less than 1% and put it in something that's down almost 27%, I see that as an opportunity. Don't get nutty. Don't take half your money and put it in that one segment just because I mentioned it. In the following segment on the U.S. market matrix, I go in the details of what I think the right percentages are. So listen to that. And of course, if it's all becomes a giant fire hose of information, which sometimes I can do, you can send me an email, Phil@Polaris Financial Planning. Do not send documents, but you can send your phone number. I'll call you. I'll try to call you. If you don't hear from me in a week or two, email me again. I won't be offended. And maybe we can talk about your situation and make it a better suggestion. I don't know, but those are things to think about. So if you're in retirement and hopefully you have a generous cushion, whatever that means for you, if you need to refill it, also taking money from VIGAX is a good place, and it's a good time to do that because it's done really well compared to most other things. So this was just kind of this, in my opening remarks, I wanted to talk about that. If the stock market correction really freaked you out, contemplate the fact that maybe you have too high a ratio in stocks. If you're 15 or more years from retirement, buckle up, buttercup. It's going to be a rough and bumpy ride. And in my world, the goal is maximum long-term growth, not the reduction of volatility. So I'm not going to recommend or suggest that you do anything other than having a whole bunch of stocks. And I might even suggest, as I just did, you take slightly more risk by taking some out of the winners and putting it into the losers. Maybe not more risk, more volatility, mathematically the same. Anyway, I'm babbling. We're going to take a quick little break. Hopefully something fun and lighthearted. I don't know what I'm going to put in after this. And then we'll have a 20-minute segment on the U.S. market matrix. And then a really nice interview with Andrew Seidel from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And we're going to talk about coronavirus. Unfortunately, I don't want to talk about it every show, but here we are. And how churches are attempting to get their hands on money again. They now want government money to bail out their sad little pathetic deity because he can't pay the bills on his own. I hope you enjoy all the stuff that comes right after this.
But in the bullshit department, a businessman can't hold a candle to a clergyman. Because I got to tell you the truth, folks. I got to tell you the truth. When it comes to bullshit, big time, major league bullshit, you have to stand in awe of the all-time champion of false promises and exaggerated claims, religion. No contest. No contest. Religion easily has the greatest bullshit story ever told. Think about it. Religion has actually convinced people that there's an invisible man living in the sky who watches everything you do every minute of every day. And the invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
This Investing Skeptically segment is about asset allocation and specifically in reference to the U.S. stock portion of your portfolio. If you want to hear more details and get a better foundation of the asset allocations and how I do it, before you continue, if you're new, before you continue, go back to shows 313, 314, and 315. I keep thinking in my head I did that a few months ago, but it was August of last year. So 9 months ago, I went through and detailed my thoughts at that time. And there's a lot of things that I talk about that are very generic and kind of timeless ideas. And then some things are more temporal and specific to the time period at which I discuss them. And this is going to be one of those time period kind of adjustment possibilities. But if you've been listening to the show for years, you don't have to go back. You might want to. And like I said, it's those three shows, 313, 314, and 315. And the asset allocation part of each show is probably 15, 20 minutes. And if you listen to podcasts at a higher rate of speed, you can do the whole thing in 40 to 60 minutes and get a pretty good idea. The quick review summary in case you're new to all this and you just don't want to go back to do all that, the first thing I look at is going to be your allocation of bonds versus stocks. If you are far from retirement, 15 plus years from retirement, no bonds. I'm assuming your goal is to have the most money available to you in retirement. If that's not your goal, probably none of this is going to apply. Well, maybe not much of it. But if your goal is maximum portfolio at retirement without concern to short-term volatility, 15 or more years to retirement, I'm going to assume for the purpose of this segment that you were thinking of retiring at 65. So if I give a year, you can adjust it for you higher or lower, depending on what you want to do. So if you're going to retire at 65, 50 and earlier is stocks. Just stocks. Don't worry about bonds, especially in today's age. Why do you want to make 2% on part of your portfolio? You might want to do that because you don't like the volatility, but I'm not talking about volatility at this point. I'm talking about maximizing long-term returns. So 15 years or more from retirement, 100% stocks. Now, when you get to 15 years and get closer and closer and closer, you want to make the cushion, the bonds, a larger and larger percent every year, gradually and slowly, until about 4, maybe 5 years to retirement, where the cushion is where it needs to be. And so from year 14 to year 4, maybe just to pick some numbers. I mean, these aren't precise things. You can adjust it and tweak it on your own. You would grow your cushion by a few percentage points every year. If the correct cushion for you works out to be about 40% of your portfolio, you could do 4% the first year, then 8, 12, 16, right? You get the idea until you got about 40%, 4 years, give or take, from retirement. If you are a more aggressive investor, that percentage might be smaller. You might build it closer to retirement. If you're really conservative, that percentage might be bigger and you can start farther out from retirement. These are just the general concepts of what you want to do. In reality, the cushion should not be defined as a percentage of the portfolio, but that is so fucking easy for me to say. It is so easy for me to say 40%, which is why a lot of websites and books do that, because it's complicated, or at least it can be complicated. For me, the correct cushion is an amount of bonds sufficiently large enough that you could sell bonds, and along with the dividends from the bonds and the dividends from all the stocks that you have, you can live on your desired budget within reason for a period of years, which might be 10, 12, or even 14 years. Again, the more years you can live on the cushion, the bigger the cushion, the smaller amount, the smaller the cushion. And so often with clients, we'll sit and talk on the phone about what is your retirement budget going to be like? And then if your budget is $100,000 a year in retirement, do you get Social Security? Do two of you get Social Security? Do you have a pension? Do you have some farmland or a patent or a Christmas song that pays you every year some money? Do you have rent, buildings, different jobs in the past that pay you pensions? And you collect all that together, and then you look at how much do you need from the investment portfolio. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that number is 5% or less. So in this theoretical scenario, $1 million total portfolio, $50,000, 5% is kind of what you should be looking at. If you want to retire early, before 62, you should seriously think about 4%. And I've had some people say, well, I can't make it on 4%, but I could make it on 5%. I could retire at 58. I said, well, then you're not ready to retire. Work a little longer, because if you don't do 4% to start with and you end up taking out too much money, you could find yourself in a position where you're falling behind. You have to go back to work. So 4% per year up to 62. After 62 and definitely 65, 5% is fine. When you get in your late 60s, you could contemplate 6% of your portfolio, and in your 70s, 7%, and even late 70s, 8%. And people start to freak out a little bit. That is if you want to take the maximum out during your lifetime and not leave it to your children. If you want to leave it to your children or charities, you take out the smallest amount possible, of course. But if you start taking out money when you're 80 at 8%, your portfolio would go to zero in 12 years if you took out 8% and it made nothing. The life expectancy of the average 80-year-old is probably around 12 or 15 years. I don't know. I haven't looked at the table lately, but that's why the percentages can be higher with the idea that you will work down the portfolio. There's no point, if you're not giving the money to somebody else, of you dying with $1 million and eating cat food or ramen noodles every day, unless that's what you really love, and that's fine. Go for it. So the cushion is a whole another episode. Like I said, that's 313. I talked about how to build that. 314 is the U.S. stocks, and that's kind of what I'm going to update today. There have been times in the past where over a period of 2 to 3 years, I don't change anything at all. And it's one of the things that sometimes for clients, it becomes a question where they'll say, why am I paying you? You didn't change anything. Well, if it ain't broke, I'm not going to fix it. And that's one of the weirdnesses about being paid a fee for assets under management, is that I have no financial incentive to just go fuck around and change things. I don't get paid anymore. I'm not getting paid for trades. I'm not getting paid for commissions. I'm not getting paid to come to you every year or two with a new idea. Oh, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have this? My goal is to maximize your portfolio. And kind of my philosophy is that if you have a whole bunch of money, everything else kind of falls in place. If you have a whole bunch of money, you can afford to stay in your house that you want to stay in. If you have a whole bunch of money, you can still pay for nursing home care if that happens to you and not run out. So we don't need a lot of these extra things like life insurance, long-term care insurance, all these things I perceive generally as marketing gimmicks, and those are whole other segments. So, all right, focus. This is U.S. stock market only part of your portfolio. I described what ratios I would use back in August. I then made some small changes and went through the vast majority of all of my client accounts and revised them. I talked about that, I think, probably in January, February, after I was all done. Well, now my philosophy has changed a little bit more based on current events. And some of this may be subtle enough that you don't give a shit and you don't want to deal with the hassle of changing your portfolio, and or you're in a taxable account, and that can take away a lot of the benefit of the adjustments because you may create tax consequences that could be as big or bigger than the benefit for making the changes. One of the things to keep in mind, if you're in a taxable account, if your portfolio has gone up over time, which is the whole idea, you're going to pay capital gains. You will pay that one way or the other, period, unless there's one way out of all those capital gains, and that is to die. And if you die and you leave that money to an heir, they get what is called the step-up basis. So if you put in $500,000 10 years ago and it's worth $1 million today, and you die and you give your 2 kids $1 million, they inherit the $1 million as $1 million. And they don't have to pay any tax on that. So if you intend to spend a big chunk of your portfolio, it doesn't matter whether you pay capital gains now or in the future, assuming the rates are the same. I think taxes in the future are going to have to be higher just because we can't pay our bills as a country. Again, a whole other fun topic there. U.S. stock market. All right, I can do this. The U.S. stock market, if you have something like $10 or $20 or even $50,000, all of this detail is doable. I think you could do this with as little as like $30-something thousand. I don't think it's worth the hassle. So under 50, just put it in the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index. Don't worry about it. Your big problem is that you have $50,000. Keep adding money. That's your goal. Add money, add more money, add more money. And if the market's down, great. You're buying on sale. If the market's up, bummer. But in the long run, it's going to be even higher. So keep adding. Again, long-term maximum returns suggest that you put the money in as fast as possible, yesterday if possible, as early in the year as possible, and you ignore all the craziness. Don't look at your portfolio every quarter. for God's sake, don't have on the ticker feed that shows how much the market is going up and down every day. It doesn't fucking matter. You can't do anything about it. And history shows that trying to do something about it generally ends up backfiring, and you're slashing around, jumping around. I don't know, flapping around. That's what I want, like a fish in a boat. You can struggle all you want, but you're not going back in the water. So the U.S. stock market, I break down into 6 segments. And this is something I came up with. Others might use it. I don't know. But they're not sectors. Sectors would be like banking, industrial, retail, things like that. These are segments of the U.S. market. There's 6 of them: large cap growth and value, mid cap growth and value, small cap growth and value. To my knowledge, the only place you can do this at this time is at Vanguard with Vanguard index funds. Other companies have really good total market or S&P 500 index funds. And again, if you have a smaller portfolio, using any one of those is fine. Maybe Fidelity has all 6 of these funds. I just may not be aware of it. It could also happen at Schwab or some other place. And again, I'm just not aware. If you know of it, send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. And of course, I can talk about it here. So those 6 segments of the U.S. market, I used those because all 6 of those segments in the long run, 10, 15, 20 years, tend to make about the same amount, 10 to 11% per year. Maybe in the next 20 years, that averages 9%. Maybe it's 12%. I don't know. But it's way better than the 2 or 3% you're going to get in stocks if you have the time to wait for it to do what it does. And in those 6 segments, I look for, what do we call it? Discrepancies. I look for 1 or 2 segments outperforming or 1 or 2 underperforming, and that creates an opportunity for me. The reason I do that is my acceptance of the idea of regression to the mean. And again, history shows that all 6 of those segments return about 10% per year in the long run. And I have nothing better than to assume that they're all going to return 10% per year on average in the long run. Additionally, when one of those 6 segments has a particularly bad period, whether it's a year or 5 or 10, it tends to do better going forward to kind of approach that mean of 10%. And sometimes this allows me to make 1 or 2% adjustments in the portfolio. And this is why part of this won't work for a $50,000 account, because the adjustments are so small that even if you're right, it's not going to have any real advantage. Again, your goal is to save more money. And from time to time, I switch things around because the economics of the U.S. market are different. Interest rates are different. As an example, in the really long run, the last 100 years, value stocks have done better than growth stocks. Small caps have made more with more volatility than large caps. However, in the end, my goal is not to avoid volatility. In the end, my goal is to have the highest, biggest portfolio when I get to retirement. In the last few years, large caps have outperformed small caps by a lot. Growth has now outperformed value by a lot. And so over the last couple of years, I've made small adjustments away from large cap and away from growth towards value and towards small cap. I am doing that again. So if you've followed the charts, if you've listened to the show regularly, none of this will surprise you. So what I am suggesting now, even though large cap stocks in reality make up 75% or more of the U.S. market, I think you should have 50% in large cap, 50% in the S&P 500, and it should be 22% large cap growth and 28% large cap value. If the market keeps doing what it's been doing, this could be a pretty stupid recommendation. If the market changes at some point in the future, and history is full of changes, this could be a pretty clever idea. So take it with a grain of salt. I don't know the future. I just know that There are periods of time, sometimes 3 to 5 to 10 years, where value wins, and then there's longer periods of time, or different periods of time where growth wins. We've now had a period of time where growth has outperformed value by quite a lot for quite a long period of time. As an example, over the last 10 years, and this is based on the Large Cap Growth Fund from Vanguard, VIGAX is the symbol, it has made 12.4% per year over the last 10 years. But the value fund, the large cap value, VVIAX, has made 8.6%. So that's a spread of almost 4%. You would have made 4% more per year over the last 10 years being in growth versus value. Again, these numbers are from March 31st, from those specific Vanguard funds. I don't pull this up every day, but 4% per year over 10 years compounded is a big freaking difference. So it's not just 40 times or 4% times 10 or 40% more. It's probably 50 or 55 or 60% more. So being in large cap growth stocks, and we know the names, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple. If you've been in those stocks, if you've been in S&P 500 funds or specifically large cap growth funds, you've crushed it. Congratulations. Now the question is, what does the future hold? And I'm pretty confident that the markets will adjust back to what their normal pattern is. And ironically, the long-term normal pattern is that value stocks do better than growth, but it hasn't happened in this last decade. So half of your money in the S&P 500, the other half in the extended market, mid-cap, small-cap, however you want to call it, depending on what your options are. Maybe if the bulk of your money is in a 401k, you can only see the S&P 500, and maybe you can only see the extended market. So then 50-50, right? That's really easy. But if you can use these 6 segments, I want half in large cap, 28% large cap growth, 22% in large cap growth, 28% in large cap value. I know it's a difference of only 6%, and these are the big adjustments that I make, but because I don't know the future, I don't want to put it all in value and then be wrong for 5 more years and miss out on all the large cap growth. You can always readjust every year. Now, the remainder, about 50%, is going to be in the extended market. And at this time, I'm going to say 25% mid cap and 25% small cap. So if your portfolio, your 401k only has S&P 500, a mid-cap index and a small-cap index, then you can do 50, 25, 25. And you're going to be in the right ballpark. But if you can break it down to a greater level of granularity, in the mid-cap, I want 10% in mid-cap growth and 15% in mid-cap value. Small-cap, 10% in small-cap growth, 15% in small-cap value. And what is driving this? And again, I'm going to give you these numbers as of 12/31 of 2020, which is already a month old at the time of this recording, and you may hear this in a year or two, so just keep in mind things change. But the 1-year performance as of March 31st, large cap growth is up 1.3, large cap value is down 15%. That's a 16-point variance. Mid cap growth is down 11, but mid-cap value is down 23. Small-cap growth is down 16, but small-cap value is down 30. Now, again, these are the 1-year numbers, not the year-to-date numbers for 2020. The 1-year numbers ending 3/31 of 2020. So go back 12 months in time. And so this provides an opportunity to, if you're doing nothing else, rebalancing is something you should do every year. You could also consider rebalancing more often when there's extreme differences, because now your portfolio is out of whack, even though it hasn't been a year. And if we have definitely had some significant volatility so far in the year 2020. So that's kind of the breakdown, just to make sure I give all the funds. What I'm going to do here, I've got to zoom in. Sorry about the beep there. I've got to zoom in, and I'm going to read off the 6 funds that I use for the U.S. stock market. First is large cap growth. I've mentioned it, VIGAX. Next is large cap value, VVIAX. And then we go to mid cap growth, VMGMX. Mid cap value, VMVAX. Hopefully you're not driving, because this would suck. You can't write this down. I hope you're not trying to write it down when you're driving. Small cap growth, VSGAX, and small cap value, VSIAX. And so those are the 6 funds that I use. My current recommendation as of today is large cap growth 22%, large cap value 28%, mid cap growth and value 10 and 15%, small cap growth and value 10 and 15% with the emphasis on the value. How you get there can be very complicated because taxes might be involved, or it could be phenomenally simple if virtually all of your money is in an IRA. And even if you have a lot of money in a taxable account, if you can add money, you might be able to get close to these ratios or make the adjustments or the rebalances with your new money. So that's a lot of numbers, a lot of information, and my thoughts on what I call the U.S. market matrix, the United States stock market only, following my style of breaking it down into 6 different segments. If you want more detailed information, or if you want me to look at your portfolio or even the funds that are available in your 401k, you may email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. And please, in that first email, do not send your social security number. Do not send any attached documents or investment plans. Do not send your address. We want to have a little bit of respect towards privacy and piracy on the internet. Once we talk by phone, so please include your phone number. That's the one thing I will encourage you to include. I'll call you and make sure that the email you sent actually got to me. We'll talk a little bit, and if it's still relevant, then you can send documents later, and we can go over that. That is something that is available to you because you're listening to the show. So hopefully some of you will take advantage of that. If I can be of help, fantastic. That's no charge, nothing expected. Keep in mind, sometimes I miss emails. Sometimes they go to the spam folder and I lose them. So please feel free to remind me after a week or two if I didn't respond to you. And boy, that was a lot longer than I expected. So hopefully some of you found value in that. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship.
If there is a God, if there is, I think most reasonable people might agree that he's at least incompetent and maybe, just maybe, doesn't give a shit. Doesn't give a shit, which I admire in a person and which would explain a lot of these bad results. So rather than be just another mindless religious robot, mindlessly and aimlessly and blindly believing that all of this is in the hands of some spooky, incompetent father figure who doesn't give a shit, I decided to look around for something else to worship, something I could really count on. And immediately, I thought of the sun. Happened like that. Overnight, I became a sun worshiper. Well, not overnight. You can't see the sun at night. But first thing the next morning, I became a sun worshiper. Several reasons. First of all, I can see the sun. Okay? Yeah. Unlike some other gods I could mention, I can actually see the sun. I'm big on that. If I can see something, I don't know, kind of helps the credibility along, you know? So every day I can see the sun as it gives me everything I need: heat, light, food, flowers in the park, reflections on the lake, an occasional skin cancer, but hey, At least there are no crucifixions, and we're not setting people on fire simply because they don't agree with us. Sun worship is fairly simple. There's no mystery, no miracles, no pageantry, no one asks for money, there are no songs to learn, and we don't have a special building where we all gather once a week to compare clothing. And the best thing about the sun, it never tells me I'm unworthy. Doesn't tell me I'm a bad person who needs to be saved. Hadn't said an unkind word. Treats me fine. So I worship the sun. But I don't pray to the sun. Know why? I wouldn't presume on our friendship. It's not polite. I've often thought people treat God rather rudely, don't you? Asking trillions and trillions of prayers every day, asking and pleading and begging for favors. Do this, give me that, I need a new car, I want a better job. And most of this praying takes place on Sunday, his day off. It's not nice, and it's no way to treat a friend. But people do pray, and they pray for a lot of different things. You know, your sister needs an operation on her crotch. Your brother was arrested for defecating in a mall. But most of all, you'd really like to fuck that hot little redhead down at the convenience store. You know, the one with the eye patch and the club foot, huh? Can you pray for that? I think you'd have to. And I say, fine, pray for anything you want. Pray for anything. But what about the divine plan? Remember that? The divine plan. Long time ago, God made a divine plan. Gave it a lot of thought, decided it was a good plan, put it into practice. And for billions and billions of years, the divine plan has been doing just fine. Now you come along and pray for something. Well, suppose the thing you want isn't in God's divine plan. What do you want him to do? Change his plan? Just for you? Doesn't it seem a little arrogant? It's a divine plan. What's the use of being God if every rundown schmuck with a $2 prayer book can come along and fuck up your plan? And here's something else, another problem you might have. Suppose your prayers aren't answered. What do you say? Well, it's God's will. Thy will be done. Fine. But if it's God's will and he's going to do what he wants to anyway, why the fuck bother praying in the first place? Seems like a big waste of time to me. Couldn't you just skip the praying part and go right to his will? It's all very confusing. So to get around a lot of this, I decided to worship the sun. But, as I said, I don't pray to the sun. You know who I pray to? Joe Pesci. Joe Pesci.
All right, everybody. Next up, we have Andrew Seidel. I always get confused. Andrew, to help me, is it Seidel or Seidel?
Seidel.
Oh,
you got it right.
As I was saying it, I was like, God damn it, no matter what I do, I seem to say it the wrong way, but I've got it this time. You are a staff attorney and even more at the FFRF. I always forget what your title has changed to, so you'll tell us that, of course. But I do want to know how you're doing, how the FFRF is doing, and is there going to be a convention this fall?
Yeah, all good questions. So let's begin at the beginning. My official, entirely made-up title is the Director of Strategic Response at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I'm still an attorney, obviously.
Yeah.
But that's the full...
And you're still on the staff.
Still on the staff, yeah. It's a little more fun of title. It's a little more flowery.
I've started using czar when I register for webinars and people say, what is your title at your company? I'm like, czar.
I like it. It's got that little bit of a tyrannical flavor to it that fits your personality pretty well.
I'm a bastard to work for. I'll tell you that.
But FFRF is doing well. We went remote pretty early on. The strategic response team, which I run at FFRF, has been able to do remote work for a while because I've been on the road so much with the book tour, which is obviously all canceled now.
Yeah.
So we were able to go remote pretty early, and then the legal team was able to do that as well because they travel for cases from time to time, so it wasn't too difficult. And then some of the things we haven't been able to do quite as well. And we have the Freedom from Religion Foundation has this great store with all this awesome free thought stuff, T-shirts and pint glasses and bumper stickers and books and all that. And that's kind of a harder thing to do remote. But we've figured out ways around all that. And, we've got plenty of state church work to do between governors exempting churches from these stay-at-home orders, turning to prayer instead of science.
Well, I was going to assume that during the time of the pandemic that churches would all just commonsensically not meet and not try to push the bounds of the Constitution, because that would be kind of a dick move to do during a pandemic, right? That they've all chilled out.
You would think, but I don't know that churches are really known for not being dicks, I guess we could say. And I mean, there are a lot that are doing the right thing here, but there are also more than a fair few who are always clearly doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, I was thinking that churches would chill, but the one thing I have noticed with churches is successful religions have two things. One, they always want to have more control, more power, fight for their privilege, and they want to have babies. Those two things are really important to help religion grow.
Yeah, and they're really seeking to play up their privilege card and the persecution card.
Oh yeah, classic moves.
It is, and I think it's really important to realize for decades, centuries, really, in the United States, Christians have been preaching that they are going to be persecuted for their faith, and that's never, of course, happened here in this country. And let's be clear, it's not happening now. But now you have the government telling them, please don't get together, because you're going to spread a deadly disease that's going to infect other people and kill members of our society. And they are seeing that as persecution, and many of them are claiming it. And part of that is because they have a deeply rooted misunderstanding of what their rights are, and more importantly, because they have this sense of entitlement that comes with being a white American Christian. Yeah,
it's funny because as much as I don't really want for us to spend a whole lot of time talking about COVID-19, I don't know how one avoids it completely. But it's one of those things. I've had these conversations, and this seems like a fun time to rant or ramble about it, depending on your perspectives, that some of the stuff that makes or has made America so successful, the independence, possibly the arrogance, the feeling of superiority, the wealth, the privilege, all these things that sometimes can actually help you succeed at doing something you shouldn't have succeeded at, something you should have given up. If you're too stupid or too arrogant to give up, sometimes you actually do end up succeeding, and that has been very beneficial in many times for the United States. But I think this is a situation where that Americanism handicaps us dramatically, because telling Americans they got to stay at home, they're like, what? I mean, okay, I'll try it for a week or two. Oh, it didn't work. Now I'm going to go back out, and you're taking away my rights.
My freedom,
to be free and to carry my gun and go stand in front of the Wisconsin courthouse with 800 people or 1,000 people, whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think you've identified one of the central things there, and I was trying to get at this a little bit. That's a misconception of the freedoms that we have.
Yeah.
And this is it's a part of a bigger fight that we've been having at the Freedom from Religion Foundation with the religious right, with Christian nationalists for about a decade now. And that is what is religious liberty? And we, and historically we, not FFRF, we, America, has envisioned that as a protection against government overreach. And the last couple years with things like the gay wedding cake case, we've seen the other side trying to weaponize religious freedom, to redefine it, to turn it from that personal protection into a weapon to impose the belief on other people. And that stems from this crucial misconception about the reach of the religious freedom right. And they think they have an unlimited right not only to believe, but also to act on that belief. And that is the misconception that they are laboring under, right? So the only absolute right we have in this country is the right to think freely. We can think and believe whatever we want without limit. But that doesn't mean we have the right to act on those beliefs. And, I mean, even if we just focus on the First Amendment, we have so many, there's 6 rights that are right there in the First Amendment. And all of them can and should be limited in certain circumstances. So freedom of speech doesn't include the right to defame another person. It doesn't include the right to threaten another person. Even political speech, which is, the quintessential example of constitutionally protected speech, we limit that when it's too close to polling places, for instance. Yeah. So all the rights that we have are limited in some way, shape, or form. And that includes the right to worship and the right to assemble. And the crazy thing about it is that states and churches already accept all kinds of limitations on this. For instance, the building codes and fire codes. You can't cram 500 people into a church that is meant to hold 40. That is not allowed, and nobody really balks at that. There have been some cases on this, actually, believe it or not. But yeah, I mean, the congregant's right to gather and worship is limited by our need to protect those congregants from being trampled to death, and to protect the community from a fire, and preventing large gatherings or any type of gatherings during a pandemic is even more crucial.
Yeah, it's like one of the things with childcare. And this may be relevant to anyone that has kids. Nursing care. What's the right word here?
Child care is correct.
Yeah, I get. My kids are old enough that I forget about these things. But
lucky you.
Yeah. If you go to a normal business that can watch your kid during the day, there's a great big list of rules that they have to follow, and those generally are pretty fucking good rules to keep your kids and the other kids safe. But often religious organizations claim that they don't have to follow those rules, and often the local governments and the states go, yeah, that seems reasonable. Separation of church and state. We can't insist that you have background checks to see if anyone has criminal or pedophilia histories. We can't require you to limit the class size for fire code. We can't require that you have an asbestos-free zone. And I look at that, and every time there's an exception for a religious organization, one has to ask themselves, or at least I think they should, why was that rule there in the first place? I mean, if it's a bad rule, you should argue that the rule should go away. But why should you argue that you should have an exception from a safety rule?
Well, and that is, I think, the other thing that we can do when we're talking about this and trying to educate believers and people who want to violate these rules on is they're not actually asking for a right to worship. They're asking for a right to risk other people's lives.
Yeah.
These people are not, there's that viral video of that woman who said she's fine. She's not worried about getting COVID because she's covered in Jesus's blood. But, these rules are in place because they will prevent the spread of the virus, right? The virus doesn't care about holy ground. It doesn't care why people are getting together. It just travels from one person to another. In South Korea, 60% of the cases in South Korea were tied to one church cluster. There was one person who attended 2 church services and infected 1,200 other people. In Sacramento County, California, 30% of the cases were tied to church worship. So clerics and worshipers who are seeking exemption from these social distancing orders are not simply asking for the right to worship, they're asking for the right to risk the health and lives of everybody else in their community and across the country.
And of course, if one person in your family, historically, they go to church, they come home, they're annoying, but now they're potentially a death vector, because they come back to the house, they come back to the relatives that they're stuck with, and it's that constant mingling, unmingling, changing. Just like they might have this thing where, I can't remember which military academy Trump may speak at, and they're going to bring back 1,000 students from across the country to hear Donald Trump speak and say nothing, and then these 1,000 students go back to their homes across the country. What kind of incredible stupidity is that? But yeah, it's a very weird thing. And I wonder, what would people think if a religion made an argument that one of our core fundamental aspects of our beliefs is that we don't have to stop for red lights.
Yeah.
And therefore we find those rules oppressive and we want exemptions from them, and we are now allowed to drive through red lights. Would the average person go, yeah, that's their religion? Or would they go, fuck you? I'm hoping it's more of the latter, but they don't start there. They start with the things like a cake. Can I be forced to make a cake I don't want to make? And that's not really the argument, of course, but it's more spinnable than a red light.
It is, and believe it or not the red light examples, but speeding examples, driver's licenses. We've seen these arguments made in cases before, and they've been non-starters, and you're right, they should be non-starters.
And of course, there's the medical exemptions where a hospital can deny people, almost always women, from proper medical care because of their religion.
Yeah, and we're seeing those expanded, unfortunately, rather than being contracted under this administration. And again, all in the name of religious liberty. And that's part of the weaponization of religious liberty, flipping that right to protect you from government overreach into a weapon to impose your religion on other people, like these women who are seeking legitimate medical procedures.
Yeah. What would you think about churches staying tax-free, but they would have to follow the same requirements FFRF does, and most charities do, of a 501c3 compliance?
I mean, that's actually one of FFRF's big pushes that we are working on. I mean, this is a long-term, it'll be a decades-long success. If we are lucky, it'll take a decade. To get churches to follow the same rules and file Form 990s the same way that every other organization does. And, another big breach in the wall of separation that we're seeing right now is public money going to churches.
Yeah.
And, one of the reasons that we have a separation of state and church in this country is because the founders thought that it was, to borrow from the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, which was written by Jefferson and pushed through the legislature by Madison, it's sinful and tyrannical for the government to tax a citizen and then take that money and give it to a church or a house of worship that they do not agree with, that they are not a part of. Sinful and tyrannical. I mean, and it makes sense. We don't want the government to force Christians to build synagogues and support synagogues. We don't want, same thing for Muslims, same thing for Jews. We don't want them to have to support mosques. And we don't want non-believers of any stripe to have to support any of those buildings or those preachers. But in the CARES Act, which we'll just call COVID stimulus to be simple, we are going to see probably a 9-figure transfer of wealth from the American taxpayer to churches and preachers and houses of worship and religious leaders all across the country. And there's no appetite in Congress to fix this. To me, that is one of the biggest problems and biggest legacies that we're going to see of the COVID pandemic. This is a massive breach in the wall of separation of state and church. FFRF is doing everything it can to fix it.
Yeah, it seems like, there's some disclosure things that were put in. I think Democrats forced some of these things, which is why some companies have now been shamed into giving the money back. But it should be more explicit, and quite honestly, they should have just gone and given more money to the average person. Just send everybody money. And if you kept your job, great. It's bonus money you can go spend and stimulate the economy. If you lost your job, it helps you cover your bills. And that way it doesn't disincentivize people from going back to work. And there's not this big game where millionaires and billionaires get all this change that they may not even need. And they just go, cool, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, and to me, this is I don't understand why nobody's talking. Well, actually, that's not true. I understand why nobody's talking about it, because people don't want to be seen to be against helping folks in this time of need. It's unpopular to argue that churches and houses of worship and clergy should not get this money. But I'm not in this to win any popularity contest. Neither is the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We're in this to defend the First Amendment, to stand up for the Constitution. And we are making this argument, but we seem to be a voice, crying alone in the wilderness.
Well, and it's so funny because my ideal would solve this dilemma, because if every adult human just got $2,000 a month for a few months while we try to figure out how to best prevent the spread of the infection, some of those people would be religious people, and they could donate that money to their church. That becomes the personal choice, not the people's money. And each person could decide what to do with the money.
Yeah. I mean, that would.
There we go.
Would certainly solve the problem.
We just solved it all. We're done. We're good.
I don't know. If only the government would listen to you, Phil.
What other kind of cases you guys have on the fire? What are some big wins that from recently?
We've had a couple of big wins. We just had a big win against the Trump administration and Ben Carson in a lawsuit involving basically the FOIA. So, we've been requesting records. He's doing a lot of religious work on the government dime.
And FOIA is Freedom of Information Act?
You got it, my friend. Thanks for making me. We lawyers tend to be.
Yeah, I got to bring you down to the street level, dude.
I appreciate it. So, I mean, it's sort of an esoteric case, but you don't get you're not supposed to be charged for records when you're seeking them in the public interest. So, you can't charge media and journalists, for instance, for these records. And that includes organizations that are out there trying to defend the Constitution, and they're trying to charge us just obscene amounts of money to get access to these public records. And we won that case. We took it with CREW, which is Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. So that was a big win that we just had earlier this week, and expecting a couple other positive decisions to come down in the coming weeks. We've got graduation season gearing up, which is always a big time for us at FFRF with graduation prayers, and preachers speaking at graduations. And initially we kind of thought, well, maybe we won't see much of that this year, but now I'm kind of thinking we might see more of it because it's going to be virtual and it's going to be piecemeal. And I'm wondering if we aren't going to see a lot more of these violations this year than we otherwise.
And this is another example where they just can't help themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, if people want to go to your little local church or big local church and give you money, fine. I don't like it, but that I don't have any say in it if you're following all the other rules and laws and everything's fair. But they have to have someone stand up in front of all the graduating students and their parents and families and everybody and promote their specific religion. And it just shouldn't happen.
It shouldn't. And the law is pretty clear on it. It's been clear for decades, but we still get complaints about it every single year at FFRF and still win cases on it every single year at FFRF. So, with schools being out, it was kind of interesting. We were at the legal team. We get between 4,000 and 5,000 state church complaints every year. Half of those involve the public schools, and so we were kind of thinking, well, maybe we'll see this tail off. But that doesn't seem to have been the case. It's pretty interesting, so I initially thought we weren't going to get any complaints about graduation, but now I'm thinking we're going to get the same number or more. So we'll have to see. But we're out there watching. We are the watchers on the wall.
Yeah. What is that? I've forgotten the name of it. That program where religious organizations have come together to promote laws or new laws being passed and sneaking them in.
Project Blitz, is that what you're thinking of?
That's what I'm thinking of. Tell us about Project Blitz and are you guys got an eye on that? What's going on there?
Absolutely. So for people who don't know, Project Blitz is an explicitly Christian nationalist push in state legislatures around the country. So it is set up by 3 different organizations. They publish a handbook for legislators to propose these bills in their state legislatures. And then they have different tiers of bills. So the first tier of bills is sort of the ceremonial, putting in God we trust in all public buildings and public schools, to kind of sort of get people used to the idea that we are a Christian nation. And then they increase the pressure with the final tier being, codifying discrimination against non-Christians and LGBTQ citizens. The real goal of Project Blitz is to make it so that Christians are this special favored class and everybody else is second-class citizens. That's the real goal.
Yeah, and it's not too radically different from the wedge strategy with creationism. To sneak stuff in a little bit more and a little bit more, and they just can't stop.
And it's also similar in that it's top down.
Yes.
But made to sort of seem grassroots instead. So we have been tracking all of the Project Blitz bills across the country and opposing them and doing quite a good job. And it's interesting because of the COVID, because of the pandemic and this response, there's been a lot of most of the state legislatures now are focused on other things.
Right. Doing actual work.
Yes, but we've seen recently in the last week, really, that shifting a little bit as they're becoming used to this sort of new normal. So in Utah, they just snuck a voucher scheme into some of their COVID response, as is Betsy DeVos is also trying to do this federally. She's going to put more than $100 million of the COVID stimulus towards what are called micro grants, which are it's just another word for vouchers. And then in Missouri, we saw a Bible class bill it's getting a hearing. It got a hearing on Wednesday. That's a pretty typical Project Blitz bill that we've been watching. And we sent out action alerts to our members in both those states, alerting them, saying, "Hey, this is happening. Call up your state legislators, oppose this." And we're working to do that. And we've been pretty successful so far. We stopped about 2/3 of the Project Blitz bills when at last count.
Wow.
But things seem to be slowing down. If people are more interested in that, you can sign up for FFRF action alerts. Just text the letters FFRF to the number 52886. So FFRF to 52886, and you'll be signed up for our action alerts. You can also check out blitzwatch.org. Blitzwatch.org is it's sort of an umbrella organization. A number of groups like the Freedom from Religion Foundation are a part of this coalition to stop Project Blitz, and all of the information on the bills and which ones are being proposed and where they're moving is on that website.
And I'm sure that FFRF will accept donations at this time.
We would love to accept donations at this time. I mean, you've got Mike Pence up there during the coronavirus task force briefings, in the lead up to Easter, telling people to donate to their churches and their houses of worship.
I saw that, and I thought you couldn't really get much more obvious than that. It was
talk about a bully pulpit, and so they've got that for them, and FFRF and secular groups have nothing. So if people are able to at this time to donate, we are like every other nonprofit out there hurting right now. FFRF has done a really good job of taking care of its employees and its members, and is still on the front lines fighting to keep state and church separate. We've done so much in the past. I mean, I actually feel like I've done more in these past 2 months than in the past year, which seems crazy. It's just been nonstop, putting in 12, 13, 14-hour days in some cases. And so if people can support our work, we are still desperately fighting, and we need all the support we can get right now.
Yeah, it's a truly amazing thing that what they want to try to do. And like I said, it's just always another thing. And I'm not a real big fan of the slippery slope argument, but they sure seem to look like that you let them have one thing and you think, well, okay, if I just let them have this, they'll stop. But they don't stop.
They don't.
Convention, when is that scheduled?
So I don't remember the exact dates of the FFRF convention. It's in the fall. It's in San Antonio. I want to say it's late September.
I'll look while you stall.
Okay, you look while I stall. I have to say, this year, really exciting lineup. Margaret Atwood, who
November 13 through 15, by the way.
Okay, so I was way off, 6 weeks off. So November 13th to 15th. Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale and the sequel, which just came out. Gloria Steinem.
Yeah,
will be there.
John
Irving, the famous author. So the lineup is really, really strong. But at this point we don't know what it's going to look like. We're going to do the right thing by people. We're not going to host something that's going to put people's lives in danger. But we just don't know what that looks like right now. This lineup. Annie Laurie Gaylor, our co-president, has been she's been trying to get Margaret Atwood and Gloria Steinem to come to a convention, not together, but for decades.
Just at all.
She got them both in the same year. So she she put a ton of work into getting this. And so if we can do it, we will. We just don't know what it looks like right now.
And if I recall correctly, this is about a week after the election. Is that?
Yes.
Well, what is election day? Is that the 6th?
It's a week after the election. I guess like 10 days after the election.
Yeah. Oh my God, I can't believe it's coming so close. And of course, as a representative of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, you can't speak on their behalf about political issues, but any thoughts on elections, politics, gerrymandering, voting from home that you want to discuss without getting in trouble?
I mean, I'll say there's very little I could say that would not get the organization in trouble and get our tax-exempt status revoked right now. I was one of the people in Wisconsin who requested an absentee ballot on time, and it did not come in the mail in time for me to vote. So I was forced by the U.S. Supreme Court and by the Wisconsin Supreme Court, who were issuing their opinions from the safety of their homes, to go out and risk a pandemic and vote. And we know now that at least 55 people have been infected as a result of that. And I'm sure the numbers are actually pretty significantly higher than that.
Yeah, that's hard to nail down kind of thing.
It really is hard to say with any definitiveness. So I'm very, very angry about that. I'm very, very, very angry about that still. And I'm channeling that energy into a lot of political activism. But I think that's all I can say safely without risking our...
Well, while we're on the topic, I can be a little more... and these are Phil's opinions, not Andrew's and not FFRF. Just some of these ideas, we know about the gerrymandering, but there's sometimes big cities where they close... places of voting that happen to be near students or minorities because they might tend more Democratic. There's been states that require a document or an ID or a license and then close the facilities where you can get licenses again near universities and communities of color. And it's just kind of a systematic whack-a-mole game, it looks like. And I just want it to go away. I want the Supreme Court to come down with a ruling that there has to be a voting center for every X number of people in an area, and that a voting district can't have a greater ratio of perimeter to area by a certain formula that allows people to, go around mountains and lakes and rivers, but not to make a serpent.
Well, a simpler thing is we can have universal vote by mail. And this is a secular issue. It's an issue that the Freedom from Religion Foundation has asked its members to contact their members of Congress about, because we want our public policy to be based on data and science and reason and compassion. And the simple fact is that this country is founded on, even if it did not realize it fully at the time, the right of everyone to vote.
Yeah.
And that, it's one of the most cherished rights we have. People have fought and died and bled for it since the founding. And that is one of the simplest ways to fully realize that founding core American value. And the reason that I consider it a secular issue, and I would really encourage everybody to go check out the action alert on FFRF's website about this, is that it will help secular Americans vote because secular Americans tend to be younger. And it would help those younger people vote for some of the reasons that you were listing. Secular Americans have been increasing their share of the electorate in each successive election pretty substantially, doubled from 2009 to 2018.
Oh, okay.
And so if anybody's interested in the numbers, I wrote a piece for Religion News Service shortly after the 2018 election, which goes over a lot of these numbers and shows that secular Americans are growing as a political force and coalescing as a voting bloc. The title is something like Politicians Take Note, Secular Americans Are a Growing Voting Bloc, or something like that. It's November 2018. But it's got the numbers in there, and I expect those numbers to continue to climb. And that's one of the reasons we, as an organization, are encouraging the support of universal vote by mail, so that those numbers climb even more.
Yeah, it's something that is happening. I just wish it happened faster, and you get what you get. I just pulled up your Twitter, and I see the whole "God is not dead" thing. Of course, your Twitter handle is at Andrew L. Seidel, Seidel. So you guys can go check out Andrew's feed. And let's see, I did notice this other thing from the FFRF. Let's see, church-state separation, Christian nationalist, flood courts with bad history. Talk to me about bad history.
Oh, so this is, I wrote a law review article that was just published by Northeastern University Law Review a couple of weeks ago. And essentially in a lot of the cases we work on, history plays a role. And oftentimes it's bad history put forward by Christian nationalists who don't really care about the historical truth or historical methodology or facts or researching those facts. And in one of the cases FFRF won recently that I was one of the lead attorneys on, the Chino Valley School Board prayer case out of California, a couple of the judges pointed out that there's a long unbroken history of school board prayer in the United States, and that at least 8 states have this history. And that number 8 kept coming up. And it came up in another case that the American Humanist Association lost in Texas. And it turned out that 11 federal judges have signed on to opinions stating that as a fact.
Oh.
So I got really curious while we were litigating this and started tracing that fact back to its source. And first, you trace it back to another law review article that was written by a student, which is not uncommon, a rising third year law student. But, that says something about the methodology. And it was only one paragraph in that law review article. And the student cited to what's called a friend of the court brief. So for non-lawyers, a friend of the court brief is something that's submitted by somebody who's not a party to the case, meaning they're not actually involved in the case. They just
have an opinion,
have something to say. They have an opinion that they want the court to hear. And that brief is where this number 8 states came from. And it was written by the Family Research Council, which is a notoriously Christian nationalist, homophobic outfit, by an attorney who attended a Christian college and a Christian law school, Regent Law School. Look it up. It's hilarious. And the historical methodology that he used appears to have been searching for the words prayer or invocation in books that dated to before 1880. And then, so it'd be prayer and invocation with school or school board. That was the search in books before about 1880. And if he got a hit, he said that was a history of school board prayer and chalked it up. And I went through every one of the sources, digging through. I spent a lot of time in the Wisconsin Historical Archives for this. It took me a long time to run it all down. Very clearly longer than he ever could have put in to get this amicus done in the time he did.
Yeah.
And what it turns out is none of it is true. Not a single one of the states, not a single one has the history that he was alleging. So, for instance, one of the examples he had was actually the report about a celebration that happened when Boston schools integrated, and the celebration happened to be in a church. And it was a report of that. Nothing to do with school boards, nothing to do with public schools at all. It was basically a small report about a party that happened. And that was, in this person's argument, the history of Massachusetts had for school board prayers. And so I wrote this long law review article digging into all these sources, and it was just published. I'm really, really proud of it. I would encourage people to read it. To me, it was absolutely shocking how easy it was for judges to
just accept.
Error. Yeah, and so that's really I'm looking at that broader problem of judges just accepting bad history, but using this as an example of why it is so problematic. And we see it happen all the time in cases involving state-church separation, including the huge cross in Bladensburg, Maryland, that the Supreme Court just upheld. And I go over some of the bad history that was used in that opinion and the opinion on which that was based, which is Marsh versus Chambers, this 1983 opinion, where the Supreme Court said, look, we've got this really long history of prayer in this country, of governments praying, so we're going to go ahead and let any government that wants to pray. And there's some really bad history in that case too. So it's a massive problem. And overall, what you have is the judiciary elevating history over legal principle.
Well, false history.
False history and over legal principle, like the separation of state and church. And so, I mean, it's really problematic. And law review articles they're scholarly articles, and they're meant to shift the thinking in the academy and the judiciary and come up with solutions. So that's really what this is trying to do. And FFRF is sending a copy of the law review to each of the judges who signed on to those opinions too.
I like it. We've gone a long time, and I know you have other things to do. I could probably talk to you all day, but is there anything else that we want to cover specifically that we haven't gotten to? FFRF, anything?
Join FFRF. The Founding Myth Tour has been canceled, sadly, and I think for all authors, sales
and that's your book.
Yes, that's my book. The Founding Myth by Christian Nationalism is Un-American.
Okay.
And I think for all authors right now, sales have just cratered. So if anybody doesn't have that book and wants something to read while they're holed up, I personally think it's a pretty good read.
It was. and I think we talked about, didn't it come out a little over a year ago or about a year ago?
Yeah, and you, Phil, you were the first podcast I ever really discussed it on because you've been so supportive. And anytime I told you about this book 8 years ago when I was really starting to get writing on it, and you were the one who continually asked me.
It is. Sometimes I look at things and I'm like, I can't believe that I've been active. I've been doing some of this stuff for so long. I don't know. It's probably started doing stuff 12, 13 years ago. But yeah, you and I talked kind of in jest for a while and then more seriously about the book. So yes, thank you for allowing my show to be the first one to have a real talk about it. And if anyone missed that, it's an old show. Just search the Phil Ferguson Show, Andrew, and I think it'll come up. But if anyone gets stuck, of course, they can email me.
Well, Phil, thank you again for having me on. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. I could talk with you about these issues for a very long time. We'll have to save some for next time.
Well, I hope, I dream, I fantasize that in mid-November that maybe we can share a drink or a meal together, but I'm not quite optimistic about that, but I'm hopeful.
Hopeful, but cautious.
Yes. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show, and I appreciate your work and every one of your coworkers and the supporters from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure, my friend. Stay safe.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Thank you so much for listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. I do greatly appreciate it. I hope you get educational value out of it, maybe entertainment value. And again, of course, nothing is actual, genuine, personalized investment advice. These are just some ideas and thoughts that I throw out there. Do what you want with them. Of course, you should consult with your own financial planner, or you could always hire Phil Ferguson and his business Polaris Financial Planning. But you can do it on your own. You can read the books that I recommend. If you want a list of those books, you can send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and I can go over those. I've also mentioned them so many times, I don't want to be too repetitive here, but great books that will help you learn about why to save and what to do with the market. The other thing I've talked about for months that I got some new software, a CRM, I think it's called, Client Research Manager, Reference Manager. I don't even know what the fuck it stands for, CRM. And it was a little rough, first going and transitioning from multiple spreadsheets and methods of tracking things, and occasionally me not responding as fast as I might have liked to clients. And so it was rough. My wife did an awful lot to help get that up and going, or otherwise I'd still be crying over it. And I think things have stabilized for now. With that in mind, and the fact that I'm not going anywhere, I am going to open the door a little bit for prospective clients. Currently, my minimum is $1 million. I am going to go to $500,000 of assets under management as a very short time, temporary minimum for up to 6 people, because I don't want to get buried. And so this is going to be a first come, first served. I hate to do it this way, but I think I have room for a few more clients but I don't want 20 or 50 new clients because I'm pretty busy. And theoretically, someday when the virus is over, I can actually go to conventions and go to Italy again and do something fun outside of my house. But for right now, I'm here and I can make a little extra money. So let me clarify again. The $500,000 of assets under management, that means you have $500,000 that you can either move to or already have at my preferred qualified custodian, TD Ameritrade. This will not count real estate property holdings that you have. It will not count farmland. It will not count an annuity that you intend to keep. It will not count 401k or 403b money. It has to be stuff that I can manage, and really importantly, not to pretend that this is anything other than a business, something that I can bill on and make money at. So if you've got $20,000 that you want to invest and you have a $500,000 401k at work, that's good for you, but I can't bill on the 401k, so it doesn't help me out. So 6 new clients, I will take first come, first serve. And since this show goes to Patreons first, they will get a head start. So if you're a patron on patreon.com/Phil, you'll be hearing this before the general public. You can email me. If you've talked to me before, you have my phone number. You can call me. And like I said, 6 people. It can be a single person. It can be a couple, whatever, but 6 clients. So a husband and wife or husband, whatever would count as 1 new client. So 6 clients, and then I'm going to re-shut the door, and maybe at some point in the future, I'll do this again, but I just don't want to bury myself in a ton of work because I think I have an obligation to make sure that I can keep providing the level of service that I am to existing clients. So for me, this is not about making the most money possible. It's about taking care of the people that are already paying me to take care of them. Anyway, so enough rambling about that. I have nowhere that I'm going in the near future. Matter of fact, right now, in the alternate universe that does not have coronavirus, I'm in Italy. We had planned our vacation to end a couple of days after May 4th because we wanted to be in Rome on May 4th. Surprising to me, in Italy, in Rome, May the 4th be with you, even though it's obviously an English thing. May the 4th is a crazy Star Wars day, or at least it was when we were in Rome by accident on May 4th many years ago, where there was Wookiees and stormtroopers and giant X-Wings and all kinds of TIE fighters and things around the Colosseum and in that area of Rome. And we wanted to see if it happened again, if that experienced again. And of course, it won't, because no one's going to be outside in Italy, and I'm not going to be in Italy. So maybe next year. The other fun thing that I've seen, my wife shared a link to me where the region of Sicily is apparently, once they reopen, which may not be for a while, but once they reopen, Sicily is going to reimburse you for 1/2 of your airfare and up to 1/3 of your lodging. Now, I don't know if that applies only to hotels or Airbnb works or other services, if it's limited to only the first 2 nights. I don't know, but it's something for me to consider because I have not yet been to Sicily. So maybe over the winter, we get back to normal, but fingers crossed, I don't know. Anyway, more longer show, more better show than I expected, and hopefully you enjoyed it. And again, like I said, the 6 new prospective clients can come in with a assets under management of $500,000 or more. And after those 6 get in, I'm going to go back to the $1 million level. So thank you for listening. If you like the show, go leave a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. And of course, you can always go to patreon.com/Phil and kick in $1 or 10, or I guess the top tier is $6.66. I do thank you very much for listening. And I do hope at some point in the future I can see you out somewhere in the world and in a world where hopefully we can hug again. But until then, ciao.